Good afternoon. Coming back from lunch, I understand, is a rather difficult process, but still, we need to conquer it because we are about to start a very interesting discussion that is part of the second session entitled Leveraging Innovation to Advance Healthcare Delivery, Bridging Research and Practice. We have a wonderful panel that will be moderated by my colleague Maria Gazouli. But before the panel, allow me to welcome Mr. John Halamka, who is a Dwight and Dian Diercks president at Mayo Clinic platform, Mayo Clinic. Κύριε Halamka, Dr. Halamka, μας ακούτε? Γεια σας, είμαι online και σας ακούω πάρα πολύ καλά. Σας ευχαριστώ. Υπέροχα. Θα ήθελα να σας καλωσορίσω στο συνέδριο HealthWorld του 2024 και ανυπομονούμε να ακούσουμε την παρουσίασή σας. Ο λόγος σε εσάς. Σας ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. Καλησπέρα σε όλους. Είναι πάρα πολύ μεγάλη τιμή που βρίσκομαι μαζί σας σήμερα. Έχω επισκεφθεί 21 χώρες το 2024 και κάθε χώρα θέτει το εξής ερώτημα. Πώς μπορούμε να επιταχύνουμε την καινοτομία, πώς μπορούμε να χρησιμοποιήσουμε τα δεδομένα του παρελθόντος προκειμένου να δώσουμε όθηση σε νέες ανακαλύψεις, σε αναλυτική και σε νέα μονοπάτια στο μέλλον. Πώς μπορούμε να προστατεύσουμε την ιδιωτικότητα των ασθενών. Πώς μπορούμε να διασφαλίσουμε ότι ό,τι κάνουμε είναι πολιτισμικά αποδεκτό αλλά και αποδεκτό από τους ρυθμιστές. Κάθε χώρα, λοιπόν, αυτό που κάνει είναι να εξετάζει πώς κάποιος χρησιμοποιεί τα δεδομένα που έχουν συλλεχθεί για τους ασθενείς και στη συνέχεια τα χρησιμοποιεί με έναν ηθικό τρόπο που διασφαλίζει την ιδιωτικότητα και με σκοπό να οδηγήσει σε καινοτόμες λύσεις. 10 εκατομμύρια ασθενείς έχουν, παράδειγμα είναι αυτό, δεδομένα τα οποία καλύπτουν την περίοδο από τη γέννησή τους μέχρι την σήμερα ημέρα. Αλλά υπάρχουν και δεδομένα για τις κλινικές δοκιμές, δεδομένα για τις συσκευές που μπορεί να έχουν, τις φορητές συσκευές. Και η πρόκληση είναι πώς να πάρουμε όλα αυτά τα δεδομένα και να τα χρησιμοποιήσουμε με έναν κοινωνικά αποδεκτό τρόπο, ούτως ώστε στη συνέχεια να αναπτύξουμε εργαλεία πάνω σε αυτά τα δεδομένα, ούτως ώστε οι χιλιάδες υπάλληλοι στην Mayo Clinic να χρησιμοποιήσουν αυτά τα δεδομένα για οποιοδήποτε είδος καινοτομίας. Πώς το κάνουμε λοιπόν αυτό? Πρώτα απ' όλα πρέπει να θέσουμε το ερώτημα. Τι ακριβώς θέλουμε να πετύχουμε? Θέλουμε να εξετάσουμε την πρώιμη διάγνωση μιας νόσου? Θέλουμε να βρούμε καινοτόμες θεραπείες ή να διασφαλίσουμε την επιτήρηση της αγοράς? Και βάσει των αποφάσεων που θα πάρουμε, θα πρέπει να αποφασίσουμε τι είδους δεδομένα πρέπει να χρησιμοποιήσουμε. Στην περίπτωση της Mayo Clinic, αυτό που έχουμε καταλήξει είναι ότι αν θέλουμε να δημιουργήσουμε εκατοντάδες αλγορίθμων για πρώιμη διάγνωση και ταυτοποίηση μιας νόσου και για καλό προγραμματισμό, θα χρειαζόμασταν πολλών ειδών δεδομένα. Κάποια δεδομένα είναι πάρα πολύ καλά διαρθρωμένα. Προβλήματα, φάρμακα, αλλεργίες, εργαστήρια. Άλλα δεν είναι τόσο δομημένα. Οι σημειώσεις, παραδείγματος χάρη, όπως είναι το ιστορικό του ασθενούς ή κάποιες άλλες εκθέσεις διαγνώσεων. Κάποια άλλα δεδομένα θα προέρχονται από την τηλεμετρία. Κάποια θα είναι όμιξ, δηλαδή αλληλουχίες γονιδιώματος ή κάποια άλλα δεδομένα για καρκίνο. Κάποια θα αφορούν ιστούς, όπως ιστό του εγκεφάλου, παραδείγματος χάρη. Οπότε, τον Ιανουάριο του 2020, αυτό που κάναμε είναι να πάρουμε τα δομημένα δεδομένα 10 εκατομμυρίων ασθενών, να τα ταυτοποιήσουμε, σεβόμενοι πάντα το GDPR. Βεβαίως, όλοι είχαν δώσει τη συνένεσή τους για την χρήση αυτών των δεδομένων και στη συνέχεια τα μεταφέραμε σε ένα cloud container. Το 2020 πήραμε επίσης όλες τις σημειώσεις που είχαν γραφτεί για ασθενείς στη Mayo Clinic και χρησιμοποιήσαμε επεξεργασία γλώσσας και machine learning για να καταλήξουμε σε στοιχεία για γεωγραφικά δεδομένα, για ημερομηνίες και στη συνέχεια τα χρησιμοποίησαμε με τέτοιο τρόπο ώστε να διασφαλίσουμε την ιδιωτικότητα. Μετά 12 ECGs, απεικονίσεις, omics και πάρα πολλές άλλες διαφάνειες χρησιμοποιήθηκαν. Το τελικό αποτέλεσμα ήταν ότι περίπου 50 τεραμπάιτ, 10 εκατομμυρίων ασθενών, και αφού τα είχαμε αυτά, αναπτύξαμε ένα εργοστάσιο τεχνητής νοημοσύνης πάνω σε αυτά τα δεδομένα, ώστε οποιοδήποτε συνεργάτης ή εταίρος, οπουδήποτε και αν βρίσκεται στον κόσμο, μπορεί να χρησιμοποιήσει αυτό το AI Factory που έχει έναν πλήρη κώδικα. Έχει έναν low code, χαμηλό κώδικα, δηλαδή μπορεί να χρησιμοποιηθούν προγράμματα SAS ή HPNX ή καθόλου κώδικας, χρησιμοποιώντας δηλαδή μία απλή οπτική διεπαφή για τη διερεύνηση των δεδομένων. Και το τελικό αποτέλεσμα όλων αυτών ήταν περίπου 250 προβλεπτικοί αλγόριθμοι και πολλά έργα τεχνητής νοημοσύνης. Αλλά υπάρχει ένα πρόβλημα. Ακόμα και οι 10 εκατομμύρια ασθενείς της Mayo Clinic δεν αντιπροσωπεύουν την ετερογενή φύση των δεδομένων που χρειαζόμαστε, ούτως ώστε να είμαστε σίγουροι ότι το προϊόν που παράγουμε είναι σωστό, δίκαιο, έγκυρο και ασφαλές. Χρειαζόμαστε ετερογενή δεδομένα γι' αυτό. Στη συνέχεια η Mayo Clinic μπήκε σε ένα άλλο σύστημα νοσοκομείων, το Mercy Health. 50 εκατομμύρια ασθενών συμφώνησαν και αυτοί να κάνουν το ίδιο και να συμμετάσχουν μαζί μας στο πλαίσιο μιας ομοσπονδίας. Αυτοί θα κρατούσαν τα δεδομένα, θα ήταν υπεύθυνοι για την διαχείριση αυτών, αλλά μεταξύ Mayo και Mercy θα μπορούσαμε να διερευνήσουμε και να αναπτύξουμε βάσει αυτών των set δεδομένων. Στη συνέχεια προσθέσαμε το UGen Καναδά, Albert Einstein Βραζιλίας, ΣΥΜΠΑ στο Ισραήλ, περίπου 1/3 του πληθυσμού της Σιγκαπούρης μέσω του SeaHealth, Νότιος Κορέα μέσω του Seoul National και άλλες χώρες από την υποσαχάρια Αφρική, Κένια, Νιγηρία, Αιθιοπία, μέσω συνεργασιών με την Aga Khan και το StanMed. Στα επόμενα τρίμηνα θα προσθέσουμε την Ινδία, την Κίνα, το Μεξικό. Και σας τα λέω όλα αυτά διότι στις 21 χώρες που επισκέφθηκα, κάθε χώρα ουσιαστικά έθετε το ερώτημα πώς μπορούμε να το κάνουμε αυτό. Και η απάντηση φαίνεται να είναι κρατήστε τα δεδομένα μέσα στη χώρα σας. Κρατήστε τα δεδομένα υπό το δικό σας έλεγχο, αλλά συνεργαστείτε με άλλους ανά τον κόσμο. Και με αυτόν τον τρόπο θα μπορέσετε να πετύχετε το καλύτερο βάθος δεδομένων, αλλά και να έχετε ετερογενή δεδομένα. Μίλησα εν συντομία για την προβλεπτική τεχνητή νοημοσύνη, δηλαδή το είδος τεχνητής νοημοσύνης που παίρνει τα δεδομένα και βοηθά βάσει του ιστορικού του ασθενούς τι μπορεί να συμβεί στο μέλλον. Αλλά τι συμβαίνει με την παραγωγική τεχνητή νοημοσύνη. Η πρόκληση που άπτεται αυτής, και βεβαίως αυτό ισχύει για πολλά πλαίσια που τη χρησιμοποιούμε, είναι ότι είναι πολύ πιο δύσκολο να αξιολογήσουμε την ακρίβεια και την ποιότητα. Υπάρχουν και θέματα συνοχής και συνέπειας. Αυτό που κάναμε λοιπόν στο δικό μας έργο παραγωγικής τεχνητής νοημοσύνης είναι το εξής. Πρώτα απ' όλα χρησιμοποιήσαμε ταυτοποιημένα δεδομένα, διότι θυμάστε ότι η παραγωγική τεχνητή νοημοσύνη θα μπορούσε να χρησιμοποιήσει άλλου είδους δεδομένων. Στη συνέχεια, χρησιμοποιήσαμε αυτή τη τεχνητή νοημοσύνη για να δούμε ποια ήταν τα ερεθίσματα, τα prompts που έμπαιναν και ποιες ήταν οι αποκρίσεις που προέκυπταν. Και έτσι καταφέραμε να μάθουμε κάποια πράγματα για την ποιότητα και την συνέπειά της. Επί του παρόντος στη Mayo Clinic και σε πολλά άλλα μέρη του κόσμου, λόγω της πρόκλησης που άπτεται της ψευδαίσθησης και λανθασμένης κατασκευής δεδομένων της τεχνητής νοημοσύνης, πολλοί χρησιμοποιούν παραγωγική τεχνητή νοημοσύνη για πιο διοικητικούς σκοπούς, όπως παραδείγματος χάρη την παρακολούθηση μιας συζήτησης μεταξύ γιατρού και ασθενούς που καταλήγει στη σύνταξη σημειώσεων χωρίς να πρέπει ο γιατρός να πληκτρολογήσει στον υπολογιστή ή για να βοηθήσει στη σύνταξη σημειώσεων που κρατούν οι νοσηλευτές ή σημειώσεων από εργαστήρια. Βοηθάει να καταλάβουμε διάφορες διαγνωστικές δυνατότητες για πολλές νόσους. Και σας το λέω αυτό, διότι δεν χρησιμοποιούμε παραγωγική τεχνητή νοημοσύνη για οποιοδήποτε σκοπό διαγνωστικό ή θεραπείας. Και όλα τα έργα παραγωγικής τεχνητής νοημοσύνης βρίσκονται υπό τον έλεγχο του EIRB, διότι πρόκειται για ένα αναδυόμενο τομέα. Πάρα πολύ σημαντικό, καθώς παράγει κανείς την προβλεπτική παραγωγική τεχνητή νοημοσύνη, είναι να επαληθεύει αυτούς τους αλγοριθμούς χρησιμοποιώντας άλλα σετ δεδομένων διαφορετικά από τα δικά του. Στη συνέχεια τα αναπτύσσει και στη συνέχεια χρησιμοποιεί την ανατροφοδότηση από γιατρούς και νοσηλευτές για να δουν κατά πόσο και πόσο αποτελεσματικά λειτουργούν αυτά. Και στη συνέχεια τα παρακολουθεί διαρκώς, όπως ακριβώς παρακολουθεί και ένα φάρμακο στο πλαίσιο της παρακολούθησης της αγοράς. Και σε αυτή τη διαδικασία, λοιπόν, πρέπει κάποιος να ορίσει τι θέλει να κάνει, να συλλέξει τα δεδομένα, να αναπτύξει ένα μοντέλο, να επαληθεύσει το μοντέλο, να το δοκιμάσει, να το παρακολουθήσει. Και όπως καταλαβαίνετε, αυτή είναι μια διαδικασία που δεν σταματά ποτέ. Δεν είναι ένα project που θα σταματήσει και αυτό ήταν. Ο ρόλος μας λοιπόν στην Μάγιο δεν ήταν απλώς να επισκεφθούμε άλλους οργανισμούς στον κόσμο και να δημιουργήσουμε έναν κόμβο. Όχι, σκοπός ήταν να παίξουμε τον ρόλο του καταλήτη ανά τον κόσμο και να ενισχύσουμε και να ενδυναμώσουμε τις τοπικές κοινότητες, ούτως ώστε αυτές στη συνέχεια να πάρουν την καινοτομία που εμείς εισαγάγαμε και να την διαχύσουν στην ευρύτερη κοινότητα. Και ο ρόλος μου στη Μάγιο είναι βεβαίως να επιβλέπω την πλατφόρμα για την καινοτομία και για τα δεδομένα, αλλά είναι να καταφέρω να χρησιμοποιήσω αυτή την πλατφόρμα προκειμένου να αγγίξω τις ζωές 4 δισεκατομμυρίων ανθρώπων μέχρι το τέλος του έργου αυτού. Και βεβαίως ό,τι κάνουμε είναι διαθώσιμο και στην Ελλάδα και σε όλους τους φίλους και σίγουρα είμαστε υπέρ της συνεργασίας μαζί σας και είμαι σίγουρος ότι υπάρχουν και πάρα πολλοί άλλοι ομιλητές που θα δώσουν το δικό τους σχολιασμό και γι' αυτό και εγώ ανυπομονώ να συμμετάσχω και εγώ στη συζήτηση που ακολουθεί.
Thank you very much for this, and we do know that innovation is here in healthcare. In fact, in the sector we have telemedicine, we have AI, there's much talk about that. There's 3D printing, cell, gene therapies, mRNA treatments. These are the future of treatment approaches, robotics, nanomedicine. But what we see is that despite these important investments and scientific innovations, that only 30 to 50% of them is now in clinical practice, and it's adopted in clinical practice. That shows that half innovations, despite their clinical validation, fail to be adopted successfully in this challenge. So it appears that the introduction of new technology symbolizes a change in the status quo, what we're used to. It requires energy, action, training, and there are various barriers, personal barriers, lack of accessibility, lack of trust in the new technology, and we see that there is some technophobia, as well as lack of training and support for the empowerment and strengthening of this new technology. And maybe we should take a look at this not at purely and strictly scientific terms, but from a sociological, anthropological point of view, to see how we can move from scientific research to clinical practice. At this point, I should like to welcome today's colleagues with, first of all, Mr. Manolopoulos, President, National Organization for Medicines and Professor, and ask him, Mr. Manolopoulos, what would be your criteria for inclusion and integration? How could we move from research to clinical practice, and from your experience with the regulatory authorities and so on and so forth, how this could be made more easily feasible? Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation, and my dear colleague for this kind introduction. And to say that I was impressed by what Dr. Halamka talked to us about, and I think I know his work because he's done quite a lot in the integration of AI and its use in cardiovascular disease treatment. This link between research and clinical practice is something that has been of concern for the scientific society for the past 30 years, from the translational research, which was the attempt to bring these areas closer. And I think that it has moved far further. When I started my career 30 years ago, these areas are very close. There are ways of direct communication. It's something we can see in examples such as tailor-made or individualized medicine, how the findings are included in clinical trials and try to put it in clinical practice. There are a lot of things regarding doctor training and all the actors or the players in the field who get used to accept and adopt these data, because if we just find it, we publish it and we read it amongst ourselves, unless we can put these in clinical practice fast, I don't see that there's much of a point. Technologies were mentioned, more modern ones that are now piquing the interest of people now. Artificial intelligence, robotics, big data, we should not underestimate it. Those who's done research with omics realize that there's a huge data analysis, and the problem has left data production, but the analysis of data and the extraction of logical results. This is something that the EOF can see as well in the diagnosis, treatment and monitoring of disease. We at the EOF, the National Organization for Medicine, and I think that others will talk about this as well, like Professor Gravanis, is an example of this synergy and collaboration that is required. It's no longer researchers with the clinicians, it's everyone that needs to work together in order to be able to have clinical practice use all these technologies. And EOF, hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, and researchers must work together. I think it's a good time to proceed with such a development. Now, in terms of the EOF and coming back to the Greek reality, the challenge lies in being able to prepare the organization to be able to evaluate and approve, because this is another necessary step for this technology to enter clinical practice, to be approved. We don't have the tools. I mean, even at the European level, because we participate as the EOF in all relevant committees, you will see medtech products like the ones we're talking about today fall under the category of medtech. It hasn't yet been discovered how to evaluate them fast and assess them, and we don't have the people who can do that. So this is another thing that we each must try to do. Train the people who will be able to contribute in terms of the regulatory authority in promoting these technologies. You see, sometimes scientists move forward, make discoveries, but their approval and their introduction in practice is a challenge that works at the European level as a big challenge. So the EOF, what it's trying to do is to be well advised, well informed, have its staff follow these developments, so that whenever Europe introduces such technologies, not to procrastinate, but to move forward with the approval and the introduction in Greek clinical practice, which is very important, especially in terms of treatments, like treatments in oncology or cell treatments that are not the exact drugs, but they are variations that are in treatment. They are means of treatment, so they fall under the category of drugs, so it's under the jurisdiction of the EOF. Right, so, well, like Professor Mr. Manolopoulos said, we need a bridge, the bridging of a gap between theoretical research and practical application and implementation. So the most appropriate person to share with us the best examples is Professor Mr. Gravanis. We would like your views, Professor. I should also like to thank the organizers for the invitation. I have very few slides, so we'll move very, very fast. Now, as of late, there have been two great changes in the way we develop treatment technologies. The first one is that we're moving from the least specialized small molecules to more specialized treatments. and I'm referring to cell and gene therapies. The second big change is that the big pharma and big pharmaceutical companies realized that the investment into developing in-house technologies is very expensive, which means there are two problems. It refers to the price of new drugs and new treatments, and second, it has a big impact in how fast it can be developed by a single agency, and I'm talking about new technologies. So the entire ecosystem has changed, and Mr. Halamka presented it very beautifully. For the development of new treatments and drugs, we have the communication real-time and in tandem of all these stakeholders. Everyone is working on it real-time. The academic scientists who are working for cell and gene therapy, the clinicians, small companies primarily from the academic and research area. It's something we know, outsourcing, that they do the outsourcing, which now the funds and the capital is given on outsourcing are huge, tens of millions per year from big companies. They are big pharmaceutical companies and biotechnology companies. And of course, in real time, at the same time with the regulatory authorities, a very good example was the development, Mr. Manolopoulos, of the vaccines. And it's something that we experience very, very intensely. And this gives a chance for a multiplying force to overcome challenges of technology, which are really very complex and complicated, and of course require complex and complicated interventions. Next slide, please. My intervention will contain two key features. The first is that I will be talking about the key criteria internationally for investment in new technologies and the development of gene and cell treatments, CGT. So what investors have as their key criteria. The second intervention will have to do with an effort that started for a few years at the University of Crete and the ITA for the development of such a technology of cell gene treatment. The three key targets for the development of new treatments is gene editing, is the use of reported stem cells for regenerative medicine, and it is of course the engineered cells, primarily the NK cells. These are the technologies that which have been developed and are mostly interesting for investors the world over. The three key criteria to invest in these technologies are first, the existence of clinically significant documentation through data. And these are data in omics analysis and big data analysis and the incorporation of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Also, it requires platform technology that finds application not only in a single treatment technology, but can be used by others and other technologies. So the multiplying factor is much larger at the level of market and investment. And of course, it requires people who have managerial skills to be able to coordinate this new ecosystem. Now, in my field, the academic field, this experience, unfortunately, is missing. Next slide, please. We can see here what happens in the global system, the global investment systems in the life sciences. Most people think that these investments happen in the first world, in the US and the European Union. A big chunk of those funds is funneled to China and Japan. Both countries, and primarily China, invests not only within the country but internationally. This has allowed countries that do not have a tradition in these technologies to have a chunk or a share of the market, what we call outsourcing. And of course, researchers, as is the case abroad, must be informed, trained, and start communicating to find money not only from the public sector, such as research programs or European programs, but to communicate with the investors directly, be that pharmaceutical or biotechnological industry, both in our country and abroad. In the next slide, I summarize which features are important for these investors to invest in our country. Allogeneic technologies are the ones that are of greatest interest. Now, the ones that were more interesting in the first years are moving back because allogeneic technologies and treatments have a greater application and easier application. It's very important for all these technologies, genes and cells as drugs, to have the same treatment as the small cells. All the processes, dosing, the manufacturing progress, how to administer it, has to do is pertinent to these new drugs as well, which in the next few years will have the lion's share in the global prescription pads. In the next slide, I summarize the efforts made to develop a technology for a very difficult and complex problem, which is paralysis following spinal damage, primarily of cystic form. Now, spin-off companies and other companies share two characteristics. They need to focus on very ambitious programs in which others have failed, because the big ones have the possibility of several projects, whereas we have in most of them, and they need to develop disruptive technologies that no one else has. So there is room for good technologies in small countries such as Greece to enter this international competition for CGTs through these two criteria. In Crete, we have focused on renewable therapeutics, which is a new company between the University of Crete and the ITE, in the development of a neuro implant for correcting this sensory motor sensation in spinal column injuries. We use two technologies, advanced biotechnological products that are human-friendly, which prepare a 3D scaffold on which we host human nerve stem cells, which we develop ex vivo in neural progenitors. And when this is achieved and we can utilize it ex vivo, then we transplant this neurograft to these people. This is a technology that is much more user-friendly and much what happens in an injured spinal cord. It has nothing to do with the electronic chips, which are indeed very important and which adapts what happens in a spinal cord injury. Reneurocells therapeutics uses human tissues on a chip and does what was discussed earlier by Dr. Halamka. Now, the company talked with Unipharma. It is one of the Greek companies that invests very seriously in new technologies. It's an incubator in KEYNOTE, so we managed to convince a venture capital in the United States that also has Greek investors to participate, to facilitate our communication. We managed to convince them that we have something interesting. And so through this collaboration, we convinced a big American company, Neurocord, that develops regenerative medicine technologies for central neural system CNS problems and injuries. This consortium has safeguarded and created, ensured, secured the money. So this is now well known as work, and we managed to convince international investors, because science needs to have, Greece rather, needs to have good science in order to convince all these investors. And now we have secured the money for the development within the next 3 years of the GMP manufacturing of the neuroimplant, and at the next stage, the IND, the preparation of the IND for the implementation of this neuroimplant for people with paralysis and neural and spine injury in Boston, in the United States, and in Europe, in the United Kingdom, and in Greece. And I'm very happy that I have been participating in this project and that we have a ReNeurocell and third party, the Greek Spinal Cord Association, as our partner. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for presenting a very good example of clinical practice. And I would like to give the floor to Ms. Maria Kalogeropoulou, Associate Director, Value Access, Health Policy and RWE in IQVIA Hellas, in order for her to tell us which are the real data that can be used in the effort. Thank you, Ms. Gazouli. I would like to thank the organizing committee for the invitation. The truth is that I was listening to Mr. Halamka in the beginning, and I felt jealous, to be honest. He mentioned all the benefits and all the different elements which, in my humble view, are missing from Athens. The Greek ecosystem has a unique, I would call it, problem. It cannot possibly connect the dots. The Greek patient has to go through different parts of the health system, none of which is communicating with the other. Every health unit is a black box, every doctor is a black box, and the data of the patient are lost. But we are very efficient at using as an excuse or even as a protective measure GDPR. But in order to use GDPR, we need to have data on which we're going to use GDPR. And the truth is that the Greek health system does not have this type of data, structured data. The example I would like to share with you is an amazing effort that we have made as IQVIA Hellas during the last 3 years, and this is important to keep in mind. We have tried to develop a platform for the collection of data of real world. It took us 3 years, not because the platform was not ready, not because we didn't know how to set it up, but because there was huge resistance from the public health system and from the people who would be responsible for data collection. The problems were many when it came to real data collection, but there are always solutions as long as we keep our minds open. So after this enormous effort that we made, we have managed to have an incredible number of data. We have a wealth of data, approximately 1,400 multiple sclerosis patients, 1,200 cancer patients, and 500 patients that are suffering by psoriasis or other dermatological problems, and atopic dermatitis, for example. The benefits stemming from this data are the ones which hopefully will be actually seen in Greece, so that we can eventually see all these wonderful things mentioned by Mr. Manolopoulos, by Mr. Gravanis, and by Mr. Halamka, so that we can actually have this linking between research and clinical practice, and linking with the access to health services. This type of data can provide us with useful information about the patient pathway, about patient-reported outcomes that can be used in order to improve the health services that the patients already receive. Other benefits have to do with the assessment of the effectiveness and the safety of the treatment means that we have in real time. And I have to say that the data that we have are not data coming from one moment of time, but they date back to 3 years, for example. So you understand how many analyses and how many comparisons can be made so as to see the evolution of the disease, and any intervention we make in these patients, what changes they bring about in their quality of life, but also in terms of other markers pertaining to that patient. In conclusion, I would like to say that, yes, we do have tools for clinical research. We have very good researchers, excellent scientists. I believe that the only thing we need to do is to find a way so as to use all these in practice, since this will be to the benefit of the patient. And of course, we need to have a structured assessment of the outcomes that these tools will have for various different reasons, even for reimbursement or for the improvement or discovery of new therapeutic solutions. So I would like to close with this wish, and I would like to leave some time for discussion. Thank you very much. We thank you very much. And we will now give the floor to the last speaker of this panel before the second round of interventions, Mr. Theodosios Bisdas. He is head of the Clinic of Vascular Surgery in the Athens Medical Center, and he will share with us his experience from the implementation of clinical therapies in clinical practice as a clinical doctor. Thank you very much. If you could please show the slides. I'm the clinical doctor that has to bring innovation in clinical practice, to implement it, to understand the benefit or the disadvantage, to understand which is the best patient for this specific innovation. It is not an easy task. The pharmaceutical company or the company that will present the product will tell us that yes, it is, but on a daily basis, we observe that the final indication is decided and issued by the doctor. If we take a look at the flow that innovation follows up until the clinical outcome, we will see that innovation will provide us with solutions about invasivity, imaging, AI, robotic systems, virtual reality that we have forgotten a little bit as of late, and then clinical outcomes, for example, safety, whether it will truly reduce complications and improve the quality of life. And after this assessment, the unmet needs will once again emerge. It is the point where we will need innovation once again. And this is a cycle that every student of medicine needs to be taught, because the unmet need will appear as a question to the industry by the doctor himself. And I will give you an example from angiosurgery. Angiosurgery may be the fastest growing specialty during the last decade, with the most devices that have ever been offered to a specialty in a matter of 10 years. Now we can actually restore the aorta intravascularly from two small holes in the bubonic area. This is a restored aorta from the aortic arch, the valve up to the ventricular aorta. We no longer follow methods like making some sections in the feet of patients with renal disease. Everything is done now intracutaneously. As you can see, the restoration has become faster, and this has improved the quality of life of patients. Moreover, we have improvements from the imaging. This is, as you can see, a picture taken from the laboratory, and the CAP is doing tomography in order to check whether the restoration has been successful, and if not, what interventions we need to make in order to be sure that the quality of a restoration is 100% successful. At the same time, we know that we want to reduce the liquid that we use in imaging. So what do? We use maps. The machine itself, with the assistance of AI, makes an infusion between CT scan and angiography, and the software tells us where we will find what we are looking for. So everything is done with much less radiation and with much less fluid used. And where does this lead? To the safety of the patient. But still, this has led us to an unmet need, which means that we want less radiation, both for the patient and the doctor. We want to have more friendly devices for the physical condition of the doctor, not have to wear lead all the time. And that is why we have asked for robotic systems to be developed for angiosurgery. I can tell you that as of January, we will be one of the first clinics globally that will use the first robotics of intensive angiosurgery. Everything will be done from a remote room, or we will have the virtual reality glasses in order to be able to see the CT scan on the patient. And this is not science fiction. It is coming in the next 10 years. Now, all this started from a bench before they reached the bedside. The basic points that we need to be aware in order to accelerate this process is, first of all, the prototyping support. Then they need to learn the regulatory training, know what's going on with intellectual property, to have the arguments needed in order to convince the businessmen to invest. And this is exactly what the Greek universities are missing. And these are the most important courses that need to be taught to students, since this will allow them to bring the clinical innovation to clinical practice. If someone asks Google or ChatGPT, what is the average time in order for a product, medtech product, to get approval, the answer will be 12 to 24 months. But this is the peak of the iceberg, because the process from research to clinical implementation involves many valleys of death. These are the areas that can lead someone to complete confusion and to get lost. And when in the past we knew that the relation between medtech and drugs had different times of approval, now we know that there's going to be an additional delay for medtech, since we need to wait for the clinical data when it comes to small companies in order for them to be purchased by the big companies. So which are the solutions? First of all, there are some innovative technologies that need to follow the fast-track pathways. We can no longer wait for the clinical data because it is the nature of the disease that does not allow us to wait for so long. At the same time, my view, what Greece is missing are the excellence centers. For many years, I was in Germany, and there, when someone was suffering from diabetes, they would go to a specialized food clinic. These excellence centers will give us the big data that one mentioned before, and, of course, the medical technology advanced program needs to be introduced. What is that exactly? It was discovered by the Chicago University. These are working groups from universities or private organizations that help people with wonderful ideas so that they can bring them quickly into medical practice, clinical practice. Thank you very much.
I don't know whether we have Mr. Halamka still with us online. We don't? Oh, there you are. Big surprise. Μετά από όλη αυτή τη συζήτηση θα θέλαμε να σας ρωτήσουμε για την τεχνητή νοημοσύνη στην κλινική πράξη και πραγματικά τώρα γνωρίζουμε ότι η τεχνητή νοημοσύνη είναι πρώτον πυλών. Θεωρείτε ότι είμαστε έτοιμοι γι' αυτό? Τα θέματα βιοειθικής έχουν επιληθεί ή οι άλλοι περιορισμοί τους οποίους θα αντιμετωπίσουμε είναι κάτι που μπορούμε να ξεπεράσουμε? Και παρακαλώ πολύ με συντομία. Ναι, κοιτάξτε, όλα αυτά που κάνουμε θα πρέπει να το δούμε από την πλευρά της τεχνολογίας, της πολιτικής και του πολιτισμού, και η τεχνολογία σήμερα είναι αρκετά καλή. Ο Γενικός Κανονισμός Προστασίας Προσωπικών Δεδομένων μας βοηθάει και δεν μας δημιουργεί προσκόμματα. Η κουλτούρα όμως είναι ένα θέμα. Πρέπει να πείσουμε τους ασθενείς μας και τα άλλα ενδιαφερόμενα μέρη ότι αυτή η καινοτομία είναι προς όφελός τους. Και θα πρέπει να βεβαιωθούμε ότι το κάνουμε αυτό με την καλύτερη δυνατή επικοινωνία και διαφάνεια. Αυτό που κάνω κυρίως είναι στο κομμάτι της επικοινωνίας της καινοτομίας μας, και το Παγκόσμιο Οικονομικό Φόρουμ και όλες αυτές οι ευκαιρίες που έχουμε να μιλήσουμε ότι όλα αυτά τα κάνουμε προς όφελος των ασθενών. Σας ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. Right, and we will continue. Let's take it in inverse with Mr. Gravanis. We heard all these beautiful things about collaboration, which is necessary between the researchers, the industry, and the stakeholders. What do you believe that would enrich an innovation system? And if we had an open technology environment, incubators, guidance programs and stuff, that if we had these things in Greece to allow young researchers to focus on that course, what would be your comment on this? Well, I believe that our country has very well trained and talented patients and doctors. And our curricula need to change, particularly in the medical schools, and not just medical schools, so that students can be much more informed as to what happens in the development of new technologies the world over. And this is a big part which we do not have. Because in the past, Greeks were known, world-renowned traders and merchants. Now, it's not just the patients that we need to offer to, it's a society, and it's also everyone else. And we need to have a different logic and a different rationale in the training of young doctors, which happens the world over, as you know very well, Maria. And this is a very key issue, very pivotal issue. Now, this is what I mentioned earlier, very, very fast. Not everyone can do innovation of state-of-the-art technologies, dear colleagues. Some will, and the country must give the possibility to those who can not to have an equality in treating our young talented people as they do the others. I mean, each to their own. And the state, the universities, and the private initiative will have to create a, let's call it a platform or a forum, as it were, of communication of these for these good, talented people, so that they may come into closer contact more easily with technology. So change in the education of our new students, the doctors, the biologists, the pharmacists, and the development of a platform of transference of world experience to our country as well. That is correct. Thank you very much. Now moving to the clinician, you talked about education. You as a clinician, because we're talking about from the scientific and research point of view, when we're moving to clinical practice, what happens? Doctors today are trained to answer to clinical questions. How easily can they introduce an innovation? What changes do you believe are required in your specialty in a targeted way so as to allow for the adoption of new technologies? Now, to me, this is the most important question. It means that the entire fermentation must happen from whenever someone is doing their specialty. The interns must be introduced in the sense of innovation. They must know what basic research is, to read publications. And it's not all the clinicians able to read a publication in the New England Journal of Medicine. As you know very well, there's a very small percentage of doctors who can understand what cost-effectiveness means and what it represents, what qualities are. Now, all these things need to be learned from the internship onwards, from research programs that will be interdisciplinary or more targeted by the professors and the directors of each clinic, to expose them to innovation and research. And if, like Professor said, there are people who are what they're going to do, to each their own, they will receive support and do something. Otherwise, they will just become a clinical doctor. And this must be the philosopher's stone that will actually lead us to where we want. So these are the principles of scientific research that need to be made available to all these young doctors to understand what innovation is. Now, you talked about real-time data. How do you believe that these will help in the prioritization of all these things? I mean, a system cannot introduce all the innovative things at the same time. There needs to be a prioritization, mustn't there? So will real data help in that direction? Well, of course they will. Mr. Bisdas had a very nice slide in the beginning that ended with unmet medical needs. Real data are what will reveal the unmet medical needs, which will allow us to build the medical services to meet those unmet needs. Unless we do this introspection, mapping, and research, we will never have the health services required by the population. The mix of diseases changes, So we will need to have real-world data that will allow us to see these changes, to map them, and to adopt these measures that will lead us to the health services needed by the population. It was Mr. Bisdas as well. I will agree with him totally regarding the cost effectiveness and the training and education systems programs that he mentioned. I will introduce another parameter because this is of vital importance. Health economics is very important for a doctor to know. And the example you gave from the endo-IVF system with the fistula, I must say that IQVIA, to see how these things are married to one another. So IQVIA has done the evaluation of health economics, and it is cost-effective. Not only is it cost-effective, it has very good savings for the healthcare system. So one adds to the other. And any knowledge and any resources these medical students may have will help them in the real world. And real-world data, for me personally, and not with be aphoristic, are very, very useful. Thank you very much. And I will now give the floor to Mr. Manolopoulos, who is the president of the National Organization for Medicine, the EOF. Okay, and I would like you to talk to us about the trends and how ready are the regulatory authorities and the legislative framework to be up to date regarding this dynamic environment that they have to live and operate in. Thank you very much. I already mentioned this in my initial presentation. The challenges are out there and they're big. They're particularly big for the regulatory authorities and the state, which is possibly the slowest moving one. It's glacial speed. So our goal is to be proactive and to be ahead of the developments or just to follow them. But the ministry on its own cannot do everything, okay? I mean, education is very important. I mean, also, another important parameter is the collaboration among all. I mean, two companies, if two companies may not work together, we're going nowhere. We must achieve collaboration, adaptability, and something I think we're missing as a country is effectiveness. We need to think that all this has a goal, which is effectiveness and safety, drug effectiveness and safety. So we must all work with these things in the back of our heads, that we are aiming at a treatment approach that is safe and effective, be that produced by something very recent as technology like omics or artificial intelligence or classical chemistry. At the end of the day, the doctors will only use it if they know that these two principles have been secured and ensured. So we need to keep this in our minds when we, all of us, and Greeks who are lagging behind, are trying to do this. But at the end of the day, at the time of implementation, we're lagging slightly behind there in clinical practice. Okay? We're missing their goal. Right, I should like to thank all colleagues, all speakers, for this very constructive roundtable, and the end point is that we want evaluation, assessment and regulation of policies in order to allow new innovation to pass on to clinical practice, and of course collaboration. When we cannot compete, it's better to collaborate to achieve the best possible outcome. Thank you very much for your participation. Photo opportunity.